Alright, so now that we feel comfortable with homologous chromosomes, now I wanted to go ahead and tell you about the genetic differences between girls and boys and what makes us different. So in human females, the 46 chromosomes that we have fall very neatly into 23 homologous pairs. However, for the males of the human species, they're going to have a non-identical pair of chromosomes. The pair that is non-identical is their sex chromosomes, so those are the chromosomes that determine if they're going to be male or female. In the case of males, their non-identical pair of chromosomes are only partly homologous, and that's going to say that they are a boy. That's because boys have the X and Y chromosome, and females have two X chromosomes. So it's actually the males of our species that determine if a baby is going to be a male or a female, because the female can only make gametes that have an X chromosome, whereas males, half of their gametes have an X chromosome and half of their gametes have a Y chromosome. So again, it's actually the males of the human species that determine if a baby is going to be a boy or a girl. Now, these chromosomes do have information besides just to have the baby become a boy or become a girl. However, this pair of chromosomes also determines if it's going to be a boy or a girl. And so if we look over here, the X chromosome in females, if we looked at them in metaphase and then we use the special dyes, so that's kind of what I was talking about, you can see the different banding patterns where there are some darker areas and some lighter areas. You can see that these two are homologous. They're both the X chromosome. One came from this baby's mom and one came from this baby's dad. Now in the case of the X and Y chromosome, here's the X chromosome and here is the Y chromosome. We can very clearly see that the Y chromosome does not match up with the X chromosome. That is what makes them non-homologous. Okay? So you can't see any matching banding patterns on the X and Y chromosomes when we compare them to each other. So in this case, the X definitely came from mom, because if this X had come from dad, then this would have to be a girl baby, but it's a boy. And this is the chromosome that came from this baby's dad. So in males, the 23rd pair of chromosomes is non-homologous. So when we are talking about the chromosomes that are homologous between males and females, we call those 22 pairs autosomes. So you have your autosomes, and then you have your sex chromosomes. The autosomes are chromosomes 1 through 22, and then the sex chromosomes are chromosomes 23. So gametes, like I said, are only going to have a single set of chromosomes, and we do have some terms that we use to discuss that, like diploid and haploid, that you heard about in the videos and also heard about in the mitosis unit. But let's talk a little bit about the life cycle. So the development of a fertilized egg, so once the sperm meets the egg, that's called a fertilized egg or a zygote. And it's only called a zygote for a little while, by the way. As soon as it's more than a few cells big, it actually can then be called the embryo. But when it's first fertilized, and it's just that one fertilized egg cell, we call that the zygote. But when that fertilized egg develops into a new adult organism, that is one phase of the life cycle of a multicellular organism. A full life cycle would include all of the stages of life, starting with the adults of one generation and how we end up with the adults of the next. So it goes all the way through reproduction. having two sets of chromosomes with one set being inherited from each parent, that is a key factor in the life cycle of any species that reproduce sexually. The fact that you have half from mom and half from dad allows you to have what we call genetic diversity, which we have touched on a little bit, not too much. But it's because we have these different chromosome combinations from different moms and different dads that we're able to have all this genetic diversity that we see amongst humans and again amongst any species that that reproduces sexually, uses a sperm and an egg. So humans, as well as most other animals and plants, are what we call diploid. The body cells contain pairs of homologous chromosomes. Another way you may have heard this pronounced is diploid. That's also correct, but I prefer to say diploid. And most people will say diploid, but if you hear diploid, it's the same thing. Di means two, so two sets of chromosomes, basically. And so the way that we denote that number for diploid is to say 2n, where n is a single set. So in this case, 2n for humans would be 2, and then n would be 23 for the number of chromosomes. Because the 2, remember, this is just a homologous, these are homologous chromosomes. So there's only 23 chromosomes, and they all have their different genes on them that make a human or make a cat or make a dog, and then they all have their homologous pair that goes with them. So one of the 23, or one half of the 23 came from mom, and one half of the 23 came from dad. But then the reason why we have that 2, again, is because the 23 from mom and the 23 from dad, they're the same, as in they both have all the directions to make a human or a cat or a dog, like I just said, but they are going to be slightly different in the versions of those genes. That's the alleles I was talking about in the last video. So while mom's chromosomes might tell you that you're going to be 5'3", you're going to have blonde hair, green eyes, dad's half might say that you're going to be 5'6", you're going to have brown hair, and you're going to have brown eyes, right? And then genetics, which is our next unit, is going to talk about how your body decides which of those that you're going to choose to actually show in the actual organism. But that's where this comes from. So 2n, that diploid. So 2 times 23, or 46 for humans. The exceptions in humans are gametes, obviously. The sperm and egg cells, remember, they're only going to have 23 chromosomes. We call that condition as haploid, or just N, which is what you can see on this slide. So each gamete, so each sperm or egg cell that gets produced, is going to have one single set of chromosomes. It'll have 22 autosomes plus a sex chromosome, either X or Y. In females, all of our gametes are going to have X. In males, half of their gametes will have X, so half of their sperm will have X, and half of their sperm that they produce will have Y. So really, anytime fertilization occurs, there is truly a 50-50% probability that you're going to end up with a boy or a girl. And so a cell with a single set of chromosomes is called haploid. So our gametes, like I said in the last slide, are haploid. You can remember that as in half for hap. It has only one part of each of the homologous pairs, which if you did not understand that in the last video, please, please, please rewatch it. Because you really have to understand this stuff to be able to do well on an assessment. You really need to be able to understand it. But the gametes are only going to have one member of each homologous pair. So one gamete will only say, okay, this baby will have blue eyes. So like I said in the last slide, mom's egg might say this baby is going to have green eyes, and the dad's sperm, their chromosomes might say that the baby is going to have brown eyes. There's only one set. All of those egg cells will say what they're going to say, and then all of the sperm cells will say what they're going to say. There's not going to be two options to choose from in an egg cell. It's only going to have a choice, so to speak, when the egg and the sperm come together and form a fertilized egg that has all 46 chromosomes. Then we have to pick and choose between which version of the gene, which allele we're going to actually express, that we're actually going to see in the human. Some of you may have done this in middle school, dominant versus recessive traits with the Punnett square. That's what I'm talking about, is how the body chooses which traits you're going to see and which ones you're not. Okay, so just a little bit more about the life cycle. In the human life cycle, a haploid sperm cell from the father will join with a haploid egg cell from the mother in a process that we call fertilization. That should be pretty straightforward. And so that's what you're seeing over here in this picture. So the sperm and the egg came together for fertilization. So the egg was haploid, that's where that N is. The sperm was haploid, that's this N. And then when the zygote forms after fertilization, that's when you have 2N. That's when you have 46. So 23, 46. Again, this cell is called a zygote. When the sperm and egg come together, it is called a zygote. It is only called a zygote when it is one cell big. The zygote then will have one complete set of homologous chromosomes. It'll have one set from mom and one set from dad. If something goes wrong where maybe the sperm had 24 chromosomes, maybe it had 2 copies of the 21st chromosome, that's when you get things like Down syndrome, which is when you have multiple, or at least for Down syndrome, that's when you have 3 copies of chromosome 21. It's called trisomy 21. So tri for 3, somy for chromosome, trisomy 21. So mom had 1 copy of the 21st chromosome. I just said dad has 2 copies. So when the sperm and the egg come together, that makes 3 copies. So in that case, that baby actually has more chromosomes. It has 47 instead of 46. But for the most part, anytime that you have a situation like that, Down syndrome is really one of the exceptions. Most of the time when you have 47 chromosomes, or maybe you have less than you're supposed to have, like 45 instead of 46, most of the time those types of genetic disorders is what we would call them. Most of the time those are going to end in a spontaneous abortion, which is the scientific term for a miscarriage. So if a zygote has too many or too few chromosomes, it's usually spontaneously aborted. Very, very sad situation. However, there's nothing that mom or dad did right or wrong that could have caused that to happen. It's just something that happens sometimes, and there's really not much that can be done about it, at least not with the scientific tools that we have at our disposal at this time. But for the most part, it's always going to be 46 chromosomes. It's going to have its complete homologous set of chromosomes. That's what most people that you meet are going to have. They're going to have 46. And then the life cycle is going to complete when a sexually mature adult, so a sexually mature adult would be someone who, at least by scientific standards, has basically hit puberty. So if you've started your period, you're technically considered a sexually mature adult. You are not a mature adult. Love you, but you're not. But technically, according to science, you are a sexually mature adult. So yeah. But the life cycle will be completed when that sexually mature adult develops from the zygote. So you started with the sperm and egg from the adults of one generation, and then you ended up with the adult of the next generation. So that completes the life cycle of a human. And in the next PowerPoint / screencast, I will start to actually tell you about the steps of meiosis. Almost, after I finish this one. But I realize I only have like 20 seconds left, so I'm just going to end it here and start the next one.